Okay, stop. So hopefully it is being recorded. Okay, Anita. Can you start?
Needed to unmute, didn't I?
Yeah.
Welcome to our March 13th class. It is so good to see everybody again. My name is Anita Kazarian. I'm a member of the steering committee, and I will serve as the MC this evening. A few items of importance before I introduce Reverend Dr. Kenneth Tanaka. Number one, each of you received a questionnaire after the class that was super easy to complete and shouldn't have taken much time. It's not mandatory, but you are encouraged to fill it out and submit it after this class. You have until the end of this month to do so. It is your questions, comments, and observations that contributes to making this class what it was intended to be, making Buddhism more accessible to us in the West. Also, starting with this questionnaire for the March class, the responses will be shared anonymously. Your name won't appear, it will be anonymous with the other members of the class so they can learn from the questions and comments that you have. Finally, as a courtesy, please inform us ahead of time if you're not able to make the class for the next month. Several of you did so for February, and thank you for that. As a way of introducing our instructor, Reverend Dr. Kenneth Tanaka, allow me to tell you a little bit more about another episode from his life as it relates to the topic of tonight's class. As he began attending the Buddhist temple at the age of 13, he felt more comfortable with the Buddhist worldview that life is a bumpy road, it's impermanent and interdependent. However, one night when he was around 15 years old, he was gripped by a sudden fear of death and the realization that he would die. And so would his family and friends. It felt very unfair that after forging a strong bond with our relationships, everyone had to die. Prior to that, death was something he knew in his head, but on that occasion, he felt the terror of death with his total being. That night, he stayed up all night until the morning. Since that experience, death became the enduring spiritual concern, or we might say the monkey on his back. That motivated his search for a resolution through the Buddhist teachings. Dr. Tanaka, the floor is yours.
Okay, and good evening, good morning to all of you. Good to see you. In the background, you see the cherry trees, cherry blossoms, which I took last year. And soon, in about a week or two, this will be taking place in all of Japan. So I just wanted to share that with you. So allow me to share today's topic. And slideshow. So March class, this is a second in our course. And we will be discussing the three themes, which are, first of all, in our parable, we are at the second phase, and it's the phase of falling off the ship. And what that means is that in our lives, it's the experiencing of difficulties and suffering in our lives. And then in Shinran's life, he too underwent losses and feelings of anxiety, as we'll be discussing. So the theme today is on the topic of falling off the boat, which I will allow me to talk about it here. In the parable, so here you have an illustration on the right. Without warning, the ship tilts violently, and the sailor and his two friends are thrown overboard. No one on the ship has noticed, so the ship continues on its course. The sailor finds himself trying frantically to stay afloat in the extremely choppy and chilly water. He looks around, but his buddies are nowhere to be seen. Here's a different version, more for the younger generation. And so suddenly the ship tilts violently. Oh no, splash! Help me! But the ship keeps going, unaware that a sailor had fallen overboard. As for that sailor, he can't see any of his buddies, so he doesn't know what's happened to them. So today I showed a new version of the story. This version was actually drawn by a young lady in Hiroshima, 400 miles from where I am in Tokyo. It was initiated by a minister who heard this story in the translation of my ocean book, and he was so inspired that he took it upon himself to have one of his acquaintances, this young lady, to draw a whole do a whole set of drawings based on the story. And he actually came all the way up to Tokyo to meet me, and he wanted to publish this in with a publisher for stories for children. And unfortunately, it wasn't accepted for a number of reasons. But here I'll be sharing this version as well. Okay, so this falling off the boat really points to a difficulty that we experience on the horizontal dimension as well as on the vertical dimension. This illustration I introduced last month. So today I'll be using the word dukkha, Sanskrit word called dukkha. It usually translated suffering, but it has much more meaning. As we can see here, suffering, pain, anxiety, fear, unhappiness, unsatisfactoriness, sadness. So rather than translating as difficult suffering, just go with the Sanskrit word dukkha. So I know this is new to some of you, but please learn this word, D-U-H-K-H-A, dukkha. And now dukkha or suffering goes to the heart of Prince Siddhartha's experience, and he played an important part in his life, early life. And as many of you know, this part of his life, I won't dwell on it too much, but I wanted to go over it because it goes to the heart of today's talk. Now, Prince Siddhartha, before he became the Buddha, as many of you know, he lost his mother soon after he was born. Well, it didn't affect him, of course, because he was an infant. He couldn't really experience it, but later on, he must have had a deep impact on his life. And he was a very sensitive child. And as you can see from this illustration, one day as a young boy, he was out in the gardens and in the fields within the castle. He saw a worm pop out of the soil, and a little bird came and ate the worm. And then as the little bird began to fly, a bigger bird came and grabbed it and captured the little bird. And when the prince saw this, he was deeply saddened, and he really felt the sadness that creatures had to kill each other. Now, the father understood the sensitive nature of his young son and asked the prophet, someone to have a prophecy about a seer to look into the future. And the answer was that his son would either be a religious leader or a king. But the part of him being told that his son might become a religious leader concerned him. So the father, had his son um, in an environment that could not generate dukkha. So he surrounded his son with people who were young, healthy, and beautiful. So as the prince grew up in this kind of environment, as he got much older into his 20s, late 20s, one day he went out the castle on an excursion. And as many of you know, he saw four people, three of which was a cause for his dukkha. One was, of course, a feeble elderly person. A second person was a sick person and a deceased person. And, he had never seen people like that because he was surrounded always by young and beautiful people and healthy people. So he asked each time, who is that person? And the driver of the car explained that he's an elderly person, a sick person, a deceased person. And each time he was shocked because he had never seen it. And he asked, will that happen to me? And the driver said, yes, sir. That was a kind of a traumatic experience. And of course, he also saw a monk, a wanderer, a spiritual wanderer who seemed so energetic, peace with oneself. And he learned that this was a seeker, a spiritual seeker. And so this experience, an excursion of going outside the castle, made him begin to think about life. And then, as you know, many of you know, at the age of around 29, he makes a big decision to leave the castle, leave the life of a prince, leave his family, his wife and young son, to seek the way to find the cause and the reason for dukkha, the suffering that he saw. So that's life of Siddhartha before he became the Buddha. Now the same thing can be seen in Shinran. Last month class, I talked about the loss of his mother before the age of 9, and the absence of his father in his life because he had left and was basically not in his life, probably as a lay person who had retreated to a temple. And so at the age of 9, he and his 4 younger brothers were taken to a monastery to become monks. Can you imagine? You're the oldest of the siblings. You have 4 younger brothers, and you were all taken to a monastery, and that kind of a experience must have been overly traumatic for young Shinran. And here's a photo of him prior to his going into the monastery. Now he too was quite a sensitive person, as we can see by a poem that he read, according to a legend that at the age of 9, when he was taken to a monastery to be ordained, he was told that, well, we'll ordain you the following morning. But he understood the impermanency of life, and there's no guarantee that there will be a next day. So on the spot, he read this poem, and it goes like this. If you assume tomorrow the cherry blossoms may have scattered in a tempest during the night. So sensitive nature really comes across here, and he's sensitive about the evanescence or the impermanence of life that brings dukkha, suffering and and expressed beautifully in this poem. And here is a photo, I'm sorry, a drawing from much later. You see him going to the monastery to meet his teacher, Jian. And then on the right, here he is being shaved. And probably the cherry tree is either this one in the front or this one in the back over here. And so the time of his ordination and the sense of impermanency that he felt. Another experience, which is really not well known, and controversy as to whether this really actually took place, but at the age of 19, so we're 10 years from the time he got ordained. At the age of 19, he takes a trip to a mausoleum further to the south in a place called Shinaga. It's a mausoleum of Prince Shotoku. And Prince Shotoku is, a prince in the 7th century, early 7th century, around 600, who allowed, who encouraged Buddhism to come into Japan. So he is considered a patron saint of Buddhism in Japan. So he was highly regarded. And so Shinran also respected him greatly. And so he goes to his mausoleum, and then there he hears a message, an oracle, and it goes like this: "We three honored ones will teach in the Saha world. Japan is a land in keeping with the Mahayana Buddhism. Listen well to what we are about to teach you. There is about 10 years or so longer left in your life. When your life ends, you will enter the Pure Land. Entrust well in the three bodhisattvas." So this must have been a great shock, because the prophecy or this oracle tells him that he only has 10 years to live. And I believe that if this is true, and we think there's a good reason to think that something like this happened, and that it added to his sense of anxiety that he didn't have much longer to live, and he has to find the answer to the question before long. So again, this is not accepted by everyone, scholars who work on Shinran, but this is something for us to consider. It comes from a text that was written or attributed to his great-grandson, Zonkaku. Okay, so I've been talking about the dukkha of the two exemplars, the Prince Siddhartha and Shinran, but dukkha is, of course, not confined only to the great saints, but to all of us, and it comes also in a form of not only existential dukkha. I make a distinction between existential and social dukkha, social suffering. Buddhism tends to focus on existential, aging, death, old age. But Buddhism is also concerned about, the social as well. Having said that, I wanted to pick up on a few examples of people who have some connection to Buddhism dealing with dukkha. One is the author of the well-known book, Freddie the Leaf. How many of you have read that book? And I'm sure you, along with millions of people in North America and elsewhere, have read this book. And Freddie the Leaf actually deals with the subject of death in a way that many readers in the West resonated with. As you know, in any society, and particularly in the US, in my view, that death is almost a taboo. People don't want to talk about death for obvious reasons. But I think Professor Leo Bascaglia succeeded in talking about death in a way that resonated with a lot of people. And so death no longer became punishment or taboo or something to neglect and ignore. And I won't go into the story about the story because well, that'll take a long time. But Freddie is a leaf on a tree, and he realizes that he'll have to leave the tree. This he is the experience of death, and he comes to the realization that even though the leaf and the tree leaf is impermanent, it will have to every year leave the tree, but he is part of a greater life, something greater than that, and he ultimately leaves the falls from the tree and becomes what part of the great life. And in a way, this represents a kind of a image that I have of Shin Buddhism and how we deal with death. But anyway, the reason why I mentioned this is that Leo Pascaglia was a professor in Southern California. He was a Catholic. When I read this story, I thought to myself, gee, this seems very Buddhistic. And sure enough, when I looked into his life at around mid-age, he actually took great interest in Buddhism. And he even went to Kyoto to study in a Buddhist temple. And that's where I think he picked up on this sensibility about death. And death, though it is a source of dukkha, one can overcome it. And Buddhism, in talking about death, allows us to face up to it and overcome it. And so I think this Freddie the Leaf book by Leo Pascaglia, influenced by Buddhism, has allowed us to look at the issue of death and confront it and overcome it, or to deal in a more satisfactory way. Another person, which by the way, like last month, after I have sent you the outline during that week, I added a few things, and whenever you see the letterings in purple, this is addition. And this will be added in the final outline that I will send you afterwards. So you'll be in the outline, and also in the PowerPoint that will also be sent to you and put into the website. So anyway, another person that all of you know is Steve Jobs. Unfortunately, he passed away a number of years ago, but he's well known for this great message or graduation speech that he did at Stanford University in 2005, where he confronts the subject of death. Here he's talking to a group of young people, and usually people don't talk about death, but he talks about death in a very positive way. And I want to share one passage. So remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. So this speech has been talked about quite a bit. It's very short, only about 15 minutes. He deals with three topics, and one of which is death. And so here is an example of someone who, again, was influenced by Buddhism. As many of you know, he was almost a Buddhist. He got married in a Buddhist ceremony, and he trained he did meditation through the San Francisco Zen Center in his 20s. And so I'm sure that he has taken on the appreciation of the issue of death. but he's not sad about it. He's not, he had already been he had contracted cancer by this time, and he was in treatment. So he was even more sensitive to what death meant for him. But here he has this kind of a message of facing up to death and using that as a way of living life more fully. And so here is another example. Now, so dukkha is not only of existential nature. So the last two and Siddhartha and Shinran dealt mostly with existential kind of suffering. But here, I wanted to also acknowledge the fact that we have dukkha on a social of a social nature, social dukkha, dukkha of social nature, as opposed to a dukkha of existential nature. And here, as we speak here, and we know that there is a war going on in Ukraine, and we are in the midst still of the pandemic. These are all dukkhas, um, and as we look in the past, in the history, especially during the Second World War, we had the Great Holocaust. It's unthinkable. 6 million people were killed by other human, and you had the Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima, and also the incarceration of Japanese Americans. I wanted to mention the last section here, last item of the incarceration of Japanese Americans. The reason why I'm doing this is that recently a video came out sponsored by the Japanese American Museum in Los Angeles, and also by my colleague, Professor Duncan Williams, who teaches at Southern California. He wrote the book, American Sutra, which many of you probably know about. And in this video, he visits the Japanese American Museum, and it talks about the role that religion, Buddhism and Christianity played in the lives of the Japanese Americans who were incarcerated, which helped them to overcome and deal with their situation. Suddenly, taken away with only a few weeks' notice to be put in relocation camps throughout the western part of the U.S. So anyway, religion has, and in this case, Buddhism, mostly Buddhism, because most of the Japanese Americans were Buddhist, probably 2/3 and a little bit more, and about a quarter were Christian, I understand. And they found solace in the religion, and especially for Buddhism, which faces the dukkha of difficulties head on. According to this video, shows a number of examples of how they were able to confront and embrace their situation. So now maybe I'll just cover one more topic before I take a break. Now, all this talk of dukkha or suffering is represented in the primary teaching of Buddhism, which is the Four Noble Truths. And I'm going to be talking about this in the second half, but just wanted to mention that in Shin Buddhism, there are some people who say, don't talk about Four Noble Truths because Shinran didn't talk about it. It's not part of Shin Buddhism. But I disagree, because even though Shinran didn't talk about it, his life, his monastic life, his seeking was premised on what the Four Noble Truths is saying. The teaching of the Four Noble Truths is saying. And so it's important for for Shin Buddhists to understand this fully in order to understand the basic premise of the teachings. And that, as you know, first noble truths of dukkha or suffering, that we all experience suffering. I use a kind of a more lighthearted expression of life is a bumpy road. But Buddha actually said, if you're not enlightened, life is a dukkha. That's the premise. Second truth, there's a cause for that, and the cause of that is gas. As I will be using this gas: greed, anger, hatred, and stupidity. Or my version is D-A-I, desire, aversion, and ignorance. So these are the afflictions or defilements or blind passions. But I wanted to use the kind of a fun expression of gas. And then there's a way out of it: cessation. This is nirvana or awakening. And then the fourth truth, which is the path. How do you get there? So the Eightfold Noble Path. Okay, I wanted to also mention that that even though the Four Noble Truth begins with dukkha, it doesn't end there. That's important. It ends with awakening, a solution to it. And then some people comment that Buddhists are always talking about dukkha and suffering. But nevertheless, many Buddhists tend to be very cheerful. And there is okay, I'm gonna keep this to we began the second half because I think I should break for discussion. And then this is a joke, but I'll keep it for the next one after the. All right, so let me pause here. Stop share. Also, that joke that I was going to tell you. Okay, so do you know why the Buddhists in Thailand, the land of smiles, why they don't ride on motor scooters and or bikes, motorbikes? Well, that's because, having studied Buddhism, it's a very Buddhist country, and they know about Buddhism, so they're very cheerful. They're always smiling and they're happy. So if they ride on motor scooters and motorbikes, then as they're riding their scooters and bikes, they have their mouth open and the bugs will fly into their mouth and get stuck between their teeth. So they don't ride on motor scooters and bikes. Actually, I kind of stole this from a group called Folklore. It's a kind of a Catholic lay group whom I met on an interreligious convention in Rome a number of years ago. And one of the members of Folklore told me why they don't ride on motor scooters. And so I thought, hey, that's very good. And so I have stolen that from them and use it for actually, I was there, His Eminence Otani Koshin, the abbot in Kyoto, the 27th, 24th descendant of Shinran in Kyoto. I was asked to represent him. And so I went to this conference and, had much great experience. But the one thing that I remember from this high class convention was this joke. And so it's kind of maybe ironic, but here we go. Okay, so keep that in mind. Even though we talk about suffering a lot, and it's the first of the Four Noble Truths, that our lives aren't, we don't end up suffering or seem, dour or, sad all the time, that there is a sense of cheerfulness and upbeatness about how we look at the world and our lives. So, okay, talked about the Four Noble Truths. And the first one, I want to focus on the first one today. And this is known to a lot of you already, so I won't go dwell on it too much, but the first noble truth is that we all experience suffering or dukkha, and they are birth, aging, illness, and death. These are the four major ones. And we talked last time about why birth was one of the dukkhas. So death, example that we saw in the prophecy of Shinran, and then talked about in the book Freddie the Leaf. Okay, the next four are these: separation from persons that one likes. Okay, and this is we just had someone, I forgot your name, to talk about. He got a phone call saying he lost his relative suddenly. And so fifth one, separation from persons and situations that one likes. Sixth one, encountering persons and situations that one dislikes. That's the opposite. And then seventh one is not getting on wants. Okay, so and the eighth one is one that is a little more difficult and requires more discussion. The first seven is basically well understood, and the eighth one is called clinging to the five aggregates or the functions that make up our momentary experience. And the five skandhas or aggregates are mentioned here. They are five senses: feelings, thought, intention, and consciousness. And this teaching is found in the earliest levels of Buddha's teaching, and it goes because Buddhism, the early Buddhist teaching especially, tends to be very psychological and explains why we experience suffering. And it goes to the fact that, comes down to the fact that we cling, we get attached, we insist on what we are experiencing. So every moment we undergo this experience. Right now, you are experiencing two of the senses, which is seeing me on the screen and hearing what I have to say. Based on that, and you have an arrow here that you have a feeling, gut level feeling of I like it or I don't like it, or it's neutral. So hopefully you're hearing me, and hopefully your feeling is one of you like it, and or it could be neutral. Then you have a thought. Oh, okay, Professor Tanaka speaking. He's talking about, so you have, oh, today's talk is a little too complicated or maybe too easy, whatever, depending on your, actually this consciousness is more like the base, this is where your values, your memories, your thoughts are stored. And this becomes the alaya vijnana, the alaya consciousness, and this impacts on how we sense, how we feel, and how we think. And so to go back to the process, so you see me talking, you have a feeling, you have some thoughts, then you have some intention. Well, basically, well, you stay on to listen to what I have to say, and this is how you feel. And then consciousness also includes over here awareness, cognition, and also decision making. So these are all so in a way, I've taken the five skandhas, the five aggregates, and show how moment to moment we are experiencing. So for Buddhism, this outline is very important. And the key is to cultivate yourself so that your consciousness becomes more purified, more Buddhistic, more Buddhistic in a sense, for example, to be able to accept impermanence, not to cling on to things that you cannot change. And so if you take an example from the Jewels book, which hopefully you have read, and which, by the way, I've asked all of you to read the Jewels book and the Ocean book completely by now, which will give you much more background to what the course. So in that Jewels book, example that I give is a famous story of the greedy dog. And and take an example of a greedy dog and how he suffered and how he brought suffering to others. I'll give you an example of here. So the greedy dog, he sees a little puppy with a bone in its mouth, and then he senses, well, good feeling. Oh, I kind of want that that bone, and then his thought says, well, he's little, he cannot fight me. I can take it away quickly. And then his intention is, well, I want that, and I take it. And intention is to grab the bone from the little dog's mouth, and then he makes a decision to take it, and he carries through with that. So you can see how his mentally, the process that he's going through. So what he does, because he is attached to what he thinks, his desires and thoughts, and he carries through with it, he brings suffering to the little dog. The little dog had his bone taken away. Now, the second half of that story, as you know, is that he goes over a bridge and he sees another dog in the waters carrying a bone. And so he wants that one too. Even though he has a bone in his mouth, he wants that bone, and he goes after it. He makes a decision to go after it. He barks and he loses that bone in the water, and he suffers. So he ends up suffering because of his attachment of wanting more bone. He already has a bone. He's greedy. He wants more. So he's a greedy dog. And so you can see his attachment to his thought led to suffering for not only for the other dog, but for himself. Okay, so I think that later on, I'm going to be talking about the 5 aggregates, because this illustration will help us to look internally and helping us to be more sensitive to what we are feeling. And that helps us in the way we react to people, especially negative thoughts, negative senses that we get from others. But if you're more attentive, you're in a better situation to not to lead to a situation that will bring about suffering. Now, I was gonna kind of use an example of what is going on in Ukraine and Vladimir Putin and what he's doing. And if you can analyze his life, his feelings, his attachment to certain thoughts, which lead to the invasion of Ukraine, and if he were better able to look at himself and to not be so attached to his grievances and his thoughts, this kind of situation may not have occurred. So I'll leave it up to you to kind of use this process to analyze what he may be going through. Okay, so now so that's the discussion of the Four Noble Truths, which is discussed more extensively in my Jewels book. So please go to that for greater clarity. And then you can find discussions in many books because it's so basic. Now, the point that I wish to make, there are 2 points I want to make. The first point is that actually these Four Noble Truths were initially meant for the noble ones or the monastics. with the aim to overcome gas or DAI to realize awakening. So this is something new that even, I think a lot of ministers probably don't know about, and even some scholars don't know about. But in Japan, there are more and more scholars who are saying that it's the noble part of noble truth is not an adjective, but it's really more the four truths of the nobles, or the four truths of the noble ones. So, do you understand the difference? It's not just simply saying the truth are noble, but it's the truths are for the noble ones, which means the monastics. Monastics means the monks and nuns. In Sanskrit, it's called Aryas, and it is related to the English word Aryans, that is kind of is unfortunately been associated with the Nazis, but it's originally European language. So, but anyway, so the point I wish to emphasize is that this means that the teaching of the Four Noble Truths seek goals that require extraordinary effort. Extraordinary because it's for monks and nuns. But I wanted to also say that even though it's for the monks and nuns, the basic framework of Buddhism, that of the truth of suffering, the cause, the extinction or nirvana, and the path to nirvana, even if ordinary people cannot fully actualize them. So Four Noble Truth, though it was originally for the monks and nuns, but for us lay people today, living today, it can provide a very important basic framework, even if we cannot fully actualize them. By that I mean fully get rid of gas, okay? So in a way, it's like the constitution of a country, providing us with a basic framework and goals. So Four Noble Truth is still important, but we have to understand that originally it was meant for monks and nuns. Actually, as some of you know, when Buddha first gave the Four Noble Truth sermon right after he was enlightened, that was one of the first sermons that he gave. Right after he gave the Four Noble Truth teaching to the monks, there was a person by the name of Yasha. He was a lay person. And for that lay person, the Buddha taught a easier teaching that does not require one to overcome gas. So that teaching included the merits of donation, giving, the moral precepts, and the right action, right? So yeah, moral precepts. Birth and the result would be birth in heaven, and then discuss the woes and of sensual desires and the blessings of forsaking them. He talked about having too much greed, but he didn't, in this easier teaching, he did not require them to overcome them. Okay, so again, this is the point that I just made, is that the teachings that he taught Yasha and for the lay people was meant to overcome gas, was not to overcome gas or die. Okay, so that's the first point. So so the second point has to do with Shinran. Okay, Shinran too was a monk, okay, and he made a serious and sustained effort as a monk to attain the aims that were the same as those of the Four Noble Truths, with its goal of attaining awakening. Okay, so this has to be fully understood in understanding Shin Buddhism, or in order to do that, we have to understand Shinran. So now, when Shinran says he's a Bonbu, this is another Japanese Buddhist term that I want you to understand if you're new. Bonbu, B-O-M-B-U, and it's hard to translate it into English. So I'm going to be using three adjectives that really define it to a great extent. That is foolish, imperfect, and incapable person. And incapable, I'll explain that. Okay. And when he says I'm a bombu, he's not comparing himself with his friends or neighbors or other people. Okay. Please note that. He is comparing himself to the Buddha, the fully awakened person. So the ideals he has is quite high. Okay. So the foolish, okay, so that's one point. And also there is another term that is very often used in Shin Buddhism, that is karmic evil. Okay. And maybe I didn't have it here. Okay. This karmic evil. And sometimes when evil beings, then they get this certain, impression of Shin Buddhism and feeling that, well, it's, I'm not perfect, but I'm not evil, right? And maybe some of you have experienced that. But evil here means, it means the same thing as bombu, which is that he's not perfect, I'm foolish, and I'm incapable of being like the Buddha. After he, and that is a realization that Shinran came after he made a serious and sustained effort. So in thinking, it's often said that Shinran's notion of bombu is like sin in Christianity. So sin in Christianity refers to turning away from God and or one's failure to follow God's teachings. Of course, Christians have different interpretation of what sin means, but this is a kind of a dictionary definition: a failure to follow God's will or God's teachings. On the other hand, bombu refers to the realization of one's incapability to be awakened by overcoming gas, even after making a sustained and serious effort for 20 years. So Shinran says, this famous quote, "I know how grievous it is that I, Gutoku, foolish, stubble-headed Shinran, am sinking in an immense ocean of desires and attachment and am lost in the vast mountains of fame and advantage." This is a very well-known quote from his main writing, Kyogyo Shinsho. By the way, for those who want to study Shinran's writings, you can go to the internet and look up collected works of Shinran, and all of his writings are in English. But anyway, so here in this, he acknowledges that, yes, basically. And so what he's talking about when he talks about how he's sinking in the immense ocean of desire is probably something that he never talks about what he means by this, but it could mean could have something to do with this sexual desires that monks are supposed to have overcome. And also vast mountain of fame and advantage. And elsewhere, he talks about how even though he doesn't know very much, he aspires to be teachers to other people, kind of wanting to be acknowledged, wanting to be, affirmed. And so he sees this as part of gas. And this is something that he feels grievous about. So his failure to overcome these thoughts, that is what he meant by being foolish, ignorant, and incapable. Okay, so another word that's with bombu is evil person, and I talked about this earlier. Again, evil person has to be understood correctly as being, realizing after he tried to overcome gas that he was, imperfect, he is incapable, and foolish in the sense that he cannot realize his ideals. Okay, so those are the two things that I wanted to emphasize with regard to Four Noble Truths. One is that initially it was meant for monks and nuns, but that it is still important for us as lay people because it gives us a basic outlook. And second was Shinran did make a serious effort, which none of us so far that I can see have made that effort. None of us have spent 20 years on doing rigorous practices as a monk or a nun, okay? So we have to understand that in order to understand where Shinran is coming from, as we used to say in the 60s, where it's coming from, okay? Now, the next point I want to emphasize is that each of us need to realize and accept the fact that we too are subject to dukkha. You know, we have fallen overboard in the middle of the ocean, and we are shot by a poison arrow. So Buddha used this example, a parable of a poison arrow. Essentially, he's saying we're shot by an arrow. In other words, we all experience suffering, but often because of our culture or whatever, we don't acknowledge it. And that is important if we want to really fully understand what Buddha and Shinran are saying. I am that person who is shot. But here in this parable, he's asking, he's shot. So the doctor is trying to take the arrow out. But then he says, oh, wait a minute. Before you pull it out, I want to know who shot this arrow. Was it a man or a woman? Was it someone of noble birth, or was he a peasant? Was that bow? What was that bow made out of? What is that arrow made out of? Etc. Etc. And so Buddha says the key is to pull the arrow out and not to ask these what I call irrelevant questions. There are some people who study Buddhism and they tend to ask these intellectual questions, which is fine. And we need to have knowledge, but we have to also we need wisdom, prajna, which is the taking the knowledge and applying it to ourselves and to really look at ourselves seriously. So we don't want to be like this man who was shot by an arrow. First, he acknowledges that he's shot, but he's asking these irrelevant questions. Also, aside from these irrelevant questions, I think sometimes we have regrets about the past, the different paths, seeking and searching that we've done, certain deeds that we have done that we regret. But I think from this parable, we can get the message, take away from this parable, the message that the past is the past. There are things that we regret. We shouldn't just don't dwell on it and just move on and focus. And so the emphasis on how we should acknowledge that we have been shot, this should also lead to the notion that our Sangha, our temple, should be a place where people's dukkha is seen, as dukkha is seen as something that is natural and universal. It's not something that it should be hidden, should be ashamed of, but should be something that can be discussed in a supportive and nurturing environment. That is what a temple should be. You know, we talk so much about the bazaar and how to run the temples and pay for the gas and the electricity, and those are important, but we should also focus on the spiritual part and the religious part, and part of that is to really focus on the dukkha part. And so what has been your experience with dukkha? It's important that you look at the fact that the arrow is stuck in your chest, and that is not something to be ashamed of, but to acknowledge. I myself talked about experience at the age of 15 of this tremendous fear of death, but I had a lot of other things going on. You know, my parents were not getting along well, and I had the trauma of moving from Japan at the age of 10 as an immigrant to a new land, couldn't speak the language, and I had all kinds of issues. And but I was fortunate that I was able to meet a teaching that acknowledged suffering. as I mentioned at the beginning, that the Mountain View Buddhist temple that I found myself at provided an environment in which I was able to deal with my dukkha, and also where my dukkhas were embraced. So I would like for all of you to kind of reflect and look at your life and to especially on the experience of dukkha. So finally, the aim of Buddhism is often expressed in Japan with these 4 Chinese characters, which says the aim of Buddhism is eliminate suffering and provide happiness, offer happiness. But I think eliminate suffering is impossible for our lay people. So realistically, I think the aim is reduce suffering and increase happiness. And so again, the teaching of Four Noble Truths begins with dukkha, but teaching does not end there. It ends in people who are cheerful and more happy. And we know that Bhutan is well known as a land of happiness. And they talk about gross national happiness. And Thailand is known as a land of smiles, as expressed by the joke that I shared with you, that despite about dukkha and suffering, that ultimately Buddhist teaching can lead us to greater happiness by reducing suffering. So in the Dhammapada, one of the earliest sutras, the Buddha says, to conquer oneself is a greater victory than to conquer thousands in a battle. And we can do this by acknowledging dukkha and suffering in our lives, and then turn to the teachings for a way to deal with it. And finally, again, as last time, may we all attain perfect peace. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes or more. Okay, can we? How did you like that joke? Well, it's cute, you know. When I first heard it from the Catholic layperson, I still remember him saying it, and he had a lot of smile. And I thought that, you know, I have great respect for other traditions, and these Catholic lay people seem to be full of you know, happiness, and that joke really represents that. Well,
Please use your chat box to ask any questions or make comments, or raise your hand, wave your hand.
so I take this silence as a sign that my explanation was so good that you understood everything.
Nope, there is a
Nope.
hand up.
Okay,
Sharon,
good. Okay, go ahead. I can't, just speak up, please. Unmute yourself and speak up.
Yes, Reverend Tanaka, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay.
Yes, hello. So my question is, what are your thoughts or comments about Jodo Shinchu and Buddha nature?
Oh, Buddha nature. Okay, Buddha nature is we all possess potential to become Buddha. That's the meaning of Buddha nature. And so Jodo Shinshu definitely accepts that. And that is, as we will discuss later, that Buddha nature, although, okay, so all beings are embraced in the wisdom and compassion of Amida. So all beings have the potential and can realize awakening. Second point, I would say Shinjin is the Shin experience of awakening. And actually, Shinjin is none other than Buddha nature. And I'll talk about that later. Not too many people will say this, but I have studied Buddha nature in its original form in the Indian text. That was my master's thesis. And I discovered that Buddha nature, actually it's called Buddha womb or Buddha embryo, but it's same thing. And that is made possible because of the something like Amida, or the Buddha Dharmakaya. So it's very much part of Jodo Shinshu. Although, if you ask a lot of Jodo Shinshu teachers, they will not say this, because I think that they have, in my estimation, they have a narrow view. And I will argue,
Ken.
I can argue. I'm not calling them narrow. I'm just saying that they have not understood Mahayana teaching, that Shinshu is part of a Mahayana teaching. And it's a fact of the matter is that sometimes some people only study Shinshu and they don't study the broader context. And if they do not, they will not understand Buddha nature. Okay,
Ken,
thank you.
Ken,
Yeah,
Ken, do you see who's sitting behind Sharon?
Reverend Sasaki.
Reverend
Laverne and
Sasaki.
Helen.
Oh, and Mrs. Sasaki.
Yes.
Okay, good to see you, Sensei. You know, Reverend Sasaki was a guy, was a sensei who got me started when I was a young kid in Mountain View, and he could speak English, so I understood, you know, Buddhism through him, and so I always have him as one of my teachers. So good to see you.
Nice to see you, Reverend Dr. Ken.
Okay. Anyway, good. Yeah, so, you know, as I give this talk, this course, you know, it's not easy to, you know, doing this for, you know, people throughout, you know, in different parts of the world. And it takes a lot of energy to do this, but I feel that a presence of my teachers who are still alive and those who have gone before me, and so it's interesting how, you know, my thoughts about my teachers are with me as I share my teachings, because I draw from the tradition, which includes all these teachers, and this tradition goes back, you know, ultimately 2,600 years, and so and then now you are part of that tradition by, you know, coming in, you know, taking part in this course. And so, as I said before, I want all of you to not only just, you know, take this course, but then go from there to do whatever you can to spread the teachings and thoughts and the ideals like the ripples of a pond. Oh, okay. Oh, Sharon, I didn't recognize you. I knew you were taking the course, but it's been a long time. And so it's wonderful to see one of Reverend Sasaki's children, one of the 5 children that they have, and one of them has. I thought maybe, Sharon, you would be become a minister. I know that. I bet you if you were, well, okay. I won't put you on the spot. Okay. Anybody else, please? We have plenty of time.
That's it. That's right.
Yes, good. Rod from Hawaii.
Yes. Hey, thank you for your talk. The question that I had to do with dukkha, and in terms of death and suffering. I think a lot of people can accept death as death. I think the thing that is, for me anyway, where I'm fearful of is suffering pain before death, you know, going through that. And I have friends who are suffering pain before death. As much as they've accepted death, it's the pain that's very difficult. And I'm trying to figure out how can we help them.
Well, that, I guess, actually, I'm not that way. I think I can deal with the pain, but I'm more concerned about death. Okay, so you have different kinds of people. So please, we have to acknowledge that. In terms of physical pain, I think you have to turn to medicine. The religion cannot. But of course, having said that, if you have, I think, a healthy appreciation of death per se, then maybe that could help slightly or somewhat dealing with the physical pain. I think that if you're fearful of death itself, then you may have more difficult time dealing with the physical pain. So again, I think the physical pain is what the doctors and nurses will have to deal with, not the spiritual. So the spiritual role of a spiritual would be what I just mentioned, that it could, lessen the physical pain. Okay,
Thank you.
did you have another point? Oh,
No,
okay.
So-
I come across this and I've
Okay.
been to see patients as an example, and they're in palliative care, and they're in extreme pain.
Okay,
Extreme
well,
pain. And I
okay,
feel so
but
bad.
I fully appreciate that, but
Yeah.
I think that, again, it's in the realm of the
Yeah.
medical people. Okay,
Okay. Thank you. Thank
thanks.
you.
Okay,
Sensei, we had a comment in the first question period. We had a comment from Sumi, which is sort of on the same sad note. I just like to read it. She says, I have 6 friends who are struggling with cancer. One does not want others to know. We want to help her, but also want to honor her request of not knowing her cancer.
oh, so this person doesn't
No,
want
I
other,
just want to add, I have a broken finger, so my typing isn't very good. But it's interesting to note that 5 of my friends are Buddhists who have come to the stage where they have accepted the diagnosis and are already in treatment. This last person is non-Buddhist, and it's very difficult. We want to help. The irony is that we all know she has cancer, but none of us can say anything about it because we were told that she doesn't want us to know. So we just pussyfoot around her and just pretend that she's okay. But we know eventually, physically, we will show she will show that she's not okay.
yeah,
But it's difficult to be around her and not want to help her somehow.
yeah. Well, I mean, that is I mean, much of how we deal with that person depends on how she or he is feeling. So, yeah, I yeah, I mean, if one is not willing to or is not able to accept, then it makes it difficult for people around them. So I guess that goes to, there's a message there that when we are in that situation, then we want to be able to acknowledge it, and so that it'll make it easier for people around us, especially our family. And hopefully I can do that when my time comes. And that is why we have to really kind of confront and deal with our personal death, so that through our teaching, through the teachings, so that when the time comes, you'll be better able, not only for yourself, but the people around you. But we're all different. I think some people can, accept it better than others. But I think with the teachings, we'll definitely be able to, will enable us to accept and to deal more, in a more healthy way, our personal death. And needless to say, death is inevitable. It'll all happen to us. And some people don't want to hear it, but that's the fact. But because if you're aware of that, like Steve Jobs, he turns that concern about death into to making our lives much more productive and much more healthy. And so I think that's another aspect of the teachings, is where you can take the confronting the suffering for the better. Yes, Mary.
Whenever we study Buddhism, we talk about death and we talk about our death. But I think that the teachings themselves actually help us deal with the loss of others. And when my father died, I had a very difficult time. I couldn't, my mother and I would go to temple, and thing is just the chanting of the Shoshinge, or just singing, Ondok-san or whatever, we would just cry. I can laugh at this right now because the thing is, I mean, every Sunday we just kept weeping. And this happened for over a year. It was just so difficult. But after my father died, I embraced the objective of actually learning more in depth of Jodo Shinchu. So when my mother passed, I was sad and I grieved. But the thing is, because I understood so much more about life and death, the grieving process was not long. It was not painful. It was just almost very loving.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank you. Yeah,
I think we have to remember that it's both ways.
Yeah, of course, and that's a good testimony of how, with the understanding of the teaching, you can deal better with loss of a loved one, and not only about your own situation, but of others. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Sensei, we have two questions in the chat.
Okay, we're running out of time, but okay, go ahead.
And I'd like to start with the second because it's sort of a nice similar topic. Geneva, I hope I'm saying it right, is asking, Dr. Tanaka, can you comment on the Buddhist view of death and nirvana? My understanding is that it's viewed as non-existence. Is this accurate?
So you mean nirvana? Nirvana is awakening, Buddhahood. So it is, I think, rather than, categorizing nirvana as nothing or whatever, any description would fail. So essentially, I just take a nirvana as awakening, understanding life, and which resolves many of the suffering that we experience. Simply that. So nirvana is literally means erasing, the erasure of gas, literally. But it also, I think it's better to understand it as enlightenment or awakening, where you have spiritual liberation, where you have overcome the dukkha and the suffering that we have experienced. Okay, so what's the second one?
The second is from Brenda. Shinran studied and practiced for many years. How important is this to truly understand and accept our own Bonbu nature?
You mean to practice for 20 years, a long time? How important that is to come to our Bonbu nature? Well, I think the bottom line is that there's no length, or I think it all depends on the individual. But what is important is the effort to self-reflect, effort to try to walk the teachings. And that's why the Four Noble Truths is important as a framework for how to which direction we should go. So I said, just like Shinran made enormous effort, we also have to make effort, not in the same way. None of us are expecting to do 20 years in the mountains, right, or in the monastery. But we can do that through, studying, taking courses like this, attending the temples, the services, reading books, and to continue to study and to self-reflect. That's effort. So that is not self-power. I said last time, difference between self-power and self-effort. We need self-effort. And when you make self-effort, a genuine, sincere effort, there will definitely be a difference. I guarantee that if you make a genuine, serious, there will be a difference, and you'll be better off than in the past. So you don't need to become monks and nuns, but we have to make effort, and that is something that I tend to emphasize. By the way, in Jodo, traditionally, Jodo Shin Buddhists say, listen to the Dharma, and that is often understood as listening to the sermons. Of course, it includes the sermons, but it also includes reading and, taking courses like this, observing people, observing your thoughts, your feelings, and to be honest with what you are feeling. I think Shinran's, one of his greatest assets, in my opinion, is his honesty. And that is why, he was, he felt that he was coming, he was not meeting his goals because he was honest. And many of his colleagues pretended that they were like the Buddha, when in fact they were not. But I don't think they ever got to the same kind of spiritual peace that Shinran came to after he took a different turn and faced up, came upon the teaching of his teacher Honen. Okay, we're quite a bit over time, so I want to end here. And so Anita, Reverend Anita.
Thank you. This concludes our March class. We hope that you found it instructive and meaningful. You are encouraged to fill out the questionnaire, not only to help the instructor, but also to put your thoughts together and review the materials. A link to the recording of this class will be sent to you to watch again at your convenience. Now, for those interested in further discussions, or if you have more questions, I know there are more questions in chat. You are cordially invited to join Dr. Tanaka and others from tonight's class in Nirvana Hour, where you may bring even your wisdom water of choice. Nirvana Hour is strictly optional, so please do not feel obliged to attend. For those who are joining, we'll have a short 10-minute break so you can get your wisdom water. And for everyone else, see you at our next session on Sunday, April 10 for most of you, and Monday, April 11 in Japan. Until our next class, please stay well and safe. Thank you and good night. And we'll be back in 10 minutes after a short break.
Can I add one word, Sensei?
Okay.
There was one of our participants let me know that there is a problem with the link in your course class layout, the link to the Japanese American Museum video.
Oh.
And I
okay.
tried and it really doesn't work. But Todd found the right link, it seems, and I posted in the chat, and hopefully it works. But maybe we could.
Okay, we can send it. We can send it to everyone. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay.
See you in 10.
Ken.
Yeah.
Did you want to record all the way through? Oh, there.
No, I just turned it off.
Did you want to record the Q&A?
No. I recorded the Q&A. Yeah, it's been recorded.
So you want the Q&A?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, okay.
Sensei, did you pause it or you wanted to stop it?
I want to stop it.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, is it is it stop, pause, stop? Oh, can I?
Well, I can stop it.
Stop yours and